Good morning, members, officers. Welcome to our September MPA meeting. We're live streamed, so welcome to people who might be watching us.
We have John McHugh. We've got apologies from John McHugh and David Jeffers.
Great. Okay. So shall I just keep this mic on all the time, Simon? Right. Okay. Any other apologies? Lovely, thanks. Sound quite echoey, doesn't it? So, item 2 is public minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of June. Are you happy to take those as a true record?
Yeah, sorry, there's an echo in the.
There is. The line's on, but it's kind of. Definitely better. A little bit. I wonder if the volume's too high. That made a difference. What we're going to do, guys, we're going to battle on.
Jim, I won't have to say as much as you.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether it's the mic. I think it's just the setup. That better.
Just one of my totally.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. So, are we happy to take those minutes? It's a true record. Thank you. This isn't working, guys, is it?
It's not working. Screen.
No. Oh, somehow there's some feedback in the system somewhere. Okay, well, that's a bit better, isn't it? We'll crack on. If you can't stand it, just put your hand up and we'll think of something else. So item 3 is public question time. Did we have any public questions? I don't think so. No. Okay. Item 4 is the reminder to declare your personal and prejudicial interests should you have one. And it's handy if you could just note the nature of that interest down on the paper so that officers can make a proper record of that. You need to do that before consideration of that item. At 5, it's the emergency evacuation procedure. So I don't think we're expecting a practice. If there is an alarm, we head out in orderly fashion onto the lawn at the front. Item 6, do I have your recommendation or agreement for exclusion of the public for our private business? I'll take that as unanimous, thank you. But item 7, it's for me to introduce you to our independent person, not member, Keith Wilkinson, who's been appointed to take the place of Andy Brecken. Welcome, Keith. Would you like to say a few words?
Thank you very much, Jim, and good morning, members. I look forward to working with you all and with the authority. Yeah, my name's Keith Wilkinson. I've been appointed as the independent person from June of this year. I will tell you a little bit about myself and my background. I'm a retired solicitor. I was a solicitor for 30 years and I retired last year. My background was a mixture of in-house and private practice. I was an in-house solicitor in local authorities where I started my career. And then at the end of my career in a local housing association. In between that, I've worked in private practice, but extensively for the public sector. So I'm I hope I can bring some perspective on and some experience on local government matters and governance matters. My role as independent person is, as a statutory role, is actually quite a narrow one. It's about member code of conduct and about misconduct. So I hope in that sense I won't be too busy. But I'm here also as long as members and the chairman and Tom permit to perhaps offer a broader governance perspective if I can, and advice where you would welcome it. So as I say, I look forward to working with you all on that. I am reasonably local, I should say. I live in Stokesley, just to the north, just outside of the national park area. So I won't be in your faces all the time, but I look forward to working with you as and when required.
Thanks, Keith. Happy to have you on board. I think you'll be staying for the meeting and hopefully having a sandwich afterwards too. So there'll be a chance for you to have a chat with Keith.
Yes.
Really pleased to have you. Okay, then on to item 8. It is the appointment of members to Recreation and Wellbeing Forum and also Equality and Diversity. And that follows the resignation of Bridget, and also the fact that we now have our Secretary of State members appointed. If I might just, I sort of dared to interfere with this at AGM, and so I'm going to keep going for 1 year only, mind you. But at the AGM, we did sort of make a plan which worked out that everybody had their first choice of committee, and that was a good way, I think, of getting us settled in, particularly with all the new members. So I had a chat with Janet and Jane, and they both were keen to be on recreation and wellbeing. The point is that because of our standing orders, we only have 3 Secretary of State appointees and 3 local authority appointees. However, in the cunning plan, Malcolm is actually a member of the Recreation and Wellbeing Forum, but he's also, as deputy chair, he can be an ex officio member of that committee. So if Malcolm wanted to come off there proper, that would enable Janet and Jane to have their first choices. Can I go to Malcolm and see how you feel about that?
Yeah, I'm very happy to do that, Chair.
Okay.
Very happy to do that, Chair.
Great, well, thank you. So I don't see Richard, but Tom, I mean, can we do that as a resolution, or would you like Malcolm to formally resign, or?
Chair, we can do that.
Yeah, so I think so. The first part, and we'll take this on block when we finish. The first part is that Malcolm's happy to stand down off that committee, and I would nominate Jane Harper and Janet Raggett from the chair to go on to it. Is there somebody that is happy to second that? Good. So, well, seeing as I proposed and seconded, we better actually take that now, and then I'll move on to the next one. So, is everybody in favour of that resolution? Brilliant. I noticed Jane and Janet aren't in favour, but you can vote as well. Brilliant. That's what we want to see. Okay, great. So that's that move. The next move is that we're still short on the recreation and wellbeing of a local authority member. We're also still short of a local authority member, and I just wondered whether you might like to leave that position open for when the local authority appoints a replacement member, and that will give them something to do. Yeah. I know they'd have to take it or leave it, but unless there's anyone that's absolutely clamouring to take up that place, I was rather hoping that members would have sort of one forum or the other forum to try and keep us focused on the work of each of those. So I know it leaves us open, but it's better than, you know, having someone with nothing to do. So are you happy to leave that open? And it'll be formally done in December, I dare say.
Yes.
Is that okay with you, Tom?
Yeah.
Good. So the last thing is we do need to get someone on information. So EDI, isn't it? And I think we do need to do that now because it needs to get started and get working. So the EDI doesn't have a caveat that it has to be one or the other type of appointee. So is there anyone that would like to step up to join? I can't remember who it is. Is it John
Arnold.
John Ritchie and Arnold? We have 3 members from that, and obviously that committee has external appointees too.
Chair, could you just explain what the EDI means?
No,
Sorry, I thought
Yeah.
Equality, diversity, inclusion. I've said it online now. Is that right?
Yeah, no, that's correct. So just to remind members, the creation of the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Forum was a recommendation from the governance review, which members approved earlier on this year. And we proposed to create that forum by building out from the current disability advisory group that the authority has convened for a number of years, broadening its remit and making it a formal part of the authority's governance in the same way that the Conservation and Climate Change Forum and the Recreation and Wellbeing Forum perform an advisory role. So it's a new group. It will meet, I understand, Ian, for the first time later this week.
Just to allow the appointment of a new member and get 1 or 2 people involved who want to get involved, we'll just
We moved it,
that
yeah.
a bit later.
Okay, so meet for the first time later on this year, but the purpose of that group will be to support the authority and advise the authority in ensuring that our work and more broadly the national park is inclusive in the way that it operates.
Okay. Would that encourage you to put your name forward, Heather? Or?
I think I've got enough on
Janet?
Quite reluctant as a new member to the squad to be putting my hand up, but I would be very interested in that position as well as the forum. And thank you for allowing Jane and I to be on the forum. But I would be really happy unless there are any other people who've got a longer tenure than me just stepping in. But yeah, I'd be pleased to support that.
Without hesitation, I should move Janet. If there's a seconder for that. Brilliant. Okay, so I think what we've said there is that we're not going to appoint a local authority member to Recreation and Wellbeing. But this time we're going to wait until the North Yorkshire replacement comes to us, and we shall put Janet Maggott for EDI forum. All happy with that? Brilliant. I'll take that as unanimous. Great. Thank you, members. That was quite painless. So moving on then, it's following our governance review, co-option for the National Park Authority. We have the paper on this. Oh, the iPad's gone to sleep. Going to introduce it, Tom.
I will do, yeah. Okay, so this the paper in the board pack builds from the governance review, the aforementioned governance review, which members approved earlier on this year, and essentially the purpose of the paper is to seek views from members and make some recommendations about how we take forward the co-option of members to the National Park Authority. And I should say it's quite It's quite a novel approach, and to my knowledge, only one other National Park Authority has co-opted board members, which enables it to broaden out its composition so that it can have voices around the table who are not necessarily represented around the table, and that was essentially the premise behind the proposal for co-options, which members approved. What the paper does is, I guess, to provide a bit of a framework for how we might move that idea forwards, rather than just kind of leaving it open. It kind of makes a few proposals about how we do that. So, moving on to section 3, I've set out some principles there that might be useful in guiding how we should make co-options and whether we should make co-options, because I kind of think it's important from an officer point of view that the principle of having co-options is not open-ended. It's there for a specific reason, and therefore it should be quite targeted, focused, and limited in the way that it works. And then under option 4, I've ventured some proposals for members to consider in discussing how we take this forward. So the first of those is that for the time being, we should limit the number of co-options to 2 people. And given the conversations that we've had previously around governance, I've recommended in the paper that those co-options should be drawn firstly from the authority's existing youth voice group, which brings together young people under the age of 35 who've got an interest in the national park. I know members have expressed concerns before that we don't always hear enough young voices around the table. And secondly, from the new EDI forum, aforementioned EDI forum, again to ensure that we're embracing diversity in all of its aspects. The paper recommends that for the time being, co-option should be focused on the National Park Authority. In other words, we shouldn't be co-opting members to Planning Committee or to FRASC. And that's because essentially this is the body that's charged overall with the governance of the organisation, setting our strategy. So it seems more appropriate that we focus co-options at this level, allowing any co-opted members to participate in the informal work of the authority as well as its training. It suggests that co-options should be time bound, so there should be an annual appointment with the opportunity to renew or review that appointment at the end of the 12-month period. And it also recommends that those co-options ought to be, or the members may consider extending the number of co-options from 2 to 3 once the mayor or combined authority has been established. I think there's a question to consider and discuss, which I've made no recommendation around at this stage, which is around remuneration. I guess there's a principle in this that if we're expecting co-opted members to participate for all intents and purposes as full members of the authority without the ability to vote, then it's appropriate that we also remunerate them as well, and therefore we should consider what level of remuneration is appropriate for the role and how we might go about doing that. And then finally, in terms of next steps, I think there's probably a discussion for members to have about how we formally make the appointment. But officers already have a kind of a line of conversation with the youth voice group. It will probably make more sense to work with the youth voice group to appoint somebody from that group to join the authority as a co-opted member. The EDI forum, of course, hasn't met yet, and so that may be something that we do a little bit later down the line. But as officers, we propose to engage that conversation at the next appropriate opportunity with the youth voice, which meets monthly with members of the staff of the National Park Authority. And perhaps I'll leave it there, Chair, to just gather members' views on how we take this forward and adjust the recommendation as necessary.
Thank you, Tom. Just before we go open up, I just say a couple of things to help guide the discussion. But I know that the South Downs are the only authority that have co-opted members in this way. And I was in the Lake District with the South Downs and others just before the weekend doing UK stuff. And I had a chat with the South Downs, and I must say that I think, and certainly the South Downs found or did, that it's quite important for the members. It is a co-option to the authority, by the authority, and I just think it would be really appropriate for the members to be involved in the search and identifying the people that we co-opt, because I don't think there will be a rush of people. Talking to the South Downs, you know, they found it quite difficult, especially to find young people who could and were prepared to do this. And so you need to treat them, I think, quite carefully. But I think that if we as a meeting here had a couple of co-options who could take part in our discussions and obviously, you know, formally and informally, that'd be really good. But I do think that we would need to feel that we own that process, and that would be good for them and good for us. So what I'm going to suggest is that the authority has a very simple task and finish or working group, like the property working group, which would probably be myself and maybe 2 members, and they would help the search for people, and they would also probably ultimately make the recommendation for the individuals to the full authority to adopt. And I think that's the correct process. And I can say, in the end, the South Downs had quite an arbitrary discussion about whether they co-opted their people or not. I'd really hope that we could avoid that here. So that would be an addition or an amendment to the recommendation, and absolutely in your hands. But I do think that probably would be the correct way, rather than just leaving it to EDI and those people to put someone forward sort of blind, if you like, because it's a two-way expectation. You know, what they could bring us and what we can give them. So with that preamble, I'll open it up for some discussion. I'm sure you've got questions. Heather.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea, and particularly for young people. I mean, we had at the area committee meeting, trying to look around the room, who was there. We had a young man that came who was like a member of the youth parliament, and he was very passionate about what he was doing, and he was talking about school meals and things. And I think it's, you know, it is essential. I think they are really someone we should be looking to, you know, give opportunities to be part of what we do. Yeah, I support that. I mean, again, it's got to be left to someone like yourself, and but I think the young voice is very important. Yeah, I support that. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. Anybody else? Christine.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I'm in support of the proposal that's set out in terms of co-opting. I think up to 2 people is probably a reasonable number. So that seems good, and that the concept generally seems good. I think my question is around whether we necessarily go immediately to Youth Voice or any other particular group without any discussion. I mean, the composition of this committee has changed quite a lot since any previous conversations took place. I'm not saying there's a preponderance of people below the age of 35, but it's a wider age range perhaps than there was previously. And I think there's lots of other groups or you know, interests that we might want represented in it. And so I think, yes, Jim, your idea of having kind of a subcommittee to look at that and to make a recommendation about the sort of additional information or representation that we want to see on the committee would be appropriate. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Malcolm, and then Jane.
Yeah, I agree with everything that people have said so far. I mean, it's clearly a good thing to do. The only point I'd make is let's keep it simple. I mean, let's have these 3 members and they can deal with all the issues that we're talking about. But, you know, just a bit of paper telling the people what it is that we want and asking them to produce a small bit of paper telling us why they think they're good for the job and why they want to do it. And then let both officers and the 3 members decide what comes to us and make a recommendation. In terms of remuneration, I'm relaxed about it. I mean, it's a fair point that Tom made that if they're coming here and contributing, then they deserve to have at least some remuneration. But again, happy to leave the other 3 members to talk about that in detail.
Thanks, Malcolm. Jane?
Again, I agree with everything that's been said here, and I'd just like to add a point that we, as a governing board, co-opted somebody on for a specific item that we felt that we were short of expertise before. And I think one of the key things is before we go and look for people, we need to identify exactly what we're looking for, because we have a specific job for them for a 1-year role, or it may extend to 18 months or so. So I think it's about working out first within the committees what you're short of in your skills, and then to find these people to help support the skill deficit.
Thanks, Jane. Janet?
Thank you. Also support everything that's been said and the fact that members should be involved in the search and selection. I think that's very useful. The only new thing I would like to introduce is to make sure that a non-voting member actually feels as though they are contributing. So we need to be very careful about what discussion people are going to be involved in. Otherwise, we could disenfranchise someone that we're just trying to encourage to get on. So it's a tricky one, isn't it? To how do we capture all the things that we want from people? They can't vote, which is right, but it's just that maybe a little bit more thought about how we are sure that we are listening to what we're asking for. That's just something that we might want to think a little bit more about. Thank you.
Totally agree with that. Patrick?
Jim, mine's more a practical point because I'm very much supportive of this proposal. But just as you said at the beginning, it's South Downs, was it, that's found it difficult to get people to come to the meetings. So a good example is next Monday morning is I'll be chairing the Conservation and Climate Change Forum. Hope as many of you as possible can come. But it is a Monday morning and it goes on till 2 o'clock. It's a very busy time of the week. Just perhaps if it had been on a Friday or something, or future planning of these committees, you might get people to attend rather than the main point of the week. Practical point, but you could get people turning up.
Thanks for that, Patrick. Michelle?
Yeah, just to, I mean, I think I take the point that's just been made, and I think that's where I think the members group, because I think some points where this sort of process has to evolve, and it may be, depending on that dialogue you have with potential candidates, you identify certain things that would need to morph and move in order to make a co-option work. If it is that that person is adding something that we don't already, obviously the risk is there's no point in duplicating what sort of naturally comes to the national park, but it's using that process to actually identify. It's just because sometimes it's, as you say, it's ways of working as much are a turn off rather than enthusiasm for what the park actually does and what contribution you made.
Yeah, totally agree with that too. Heather?
Yeah, I'm sorry, but as Vice Chair Pratt, we've got to look at value for money, and I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't give remuneration expenses, but I think we're going to look at it an individual package. It's my own opinion that rather than buy a salary for the year, we look at when they attend meetings. I'd like to look at more in that package really, and perhaps they might have to come more often and get involved with officers and things. I think possibly it's entirely for discussion, but I'd like to see done more on a meeting basis with expenses rather than on an annual thing. And then it can encourage them, if they need to do more working, particularly with what's going forward, you might find, you know, what's happening. We'll discuss in private papers, maybe we need something with a bit of help like that. And in my opinion, we should look at a separate package on the financial side. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, like I say, it is quite a groundbreaking thing, and I totally agree with all that's been said. Thank you to you for agreeing with what I've had to say. But we will have to suck it and see a little bit. And I think, you know, I think getting out there and learning as much as we can, it will be important. I do think, as has been said, you know, and as I said in the start, making this person or people feel a part of our process is really important. And I mean, planning a park, we don't often have casting votes or argy-bargy in that sense at NPA. We tend to work via consensus. And so I think there's every chance that someone, provided this group of members, you know, feel that they really want to engage with them. And that's the key, isn't it? That they're able to engage with us and that we want to engage with them. And then we'll just have to see how we get on. I totally agree with Michelle that we're looking for additionality, not just more of the same. And I think, particularly with the EDI, I wouldn't necessarily expect to have someone from EDI Forum. I would expect that forum to find someone who they think would come forward. You know, I don't think it's a given that they have to be from EDI, because that forum is already convened to do a job for us and already connected. And so I would really be hoping to find someone who could reach to underrepresented groups that we struggle to reach at the moment. And that's what government's always charging us and tasking us to say, you must be representative of the population. And that means that if we have people who represent underrepresented groups, those people see them on our board and those people see us as for them. And it can be just as simple as that, you know. So I think we're going to have to make a start somewhere. In the back of my mind, I would expect that this person would follow our code of conduct and those things just the same as we do. You know, it's not just a throwaway job. It's a serious and responsible thing that we're asking them to do. And it has to be, because, you know, we're making decisions that allocate taxpayers' money and change people's lives. And so we shouldn't take that lightly. You know, they should be as serious about it as the other members are. And I was sort of thinking of allocating a package of remuneration that represented the proportion of the work that they do. So if they don't do planning and they don't do FASC, it might be half, or it might be 2/3 or something like that of the members, and that would be proportionately fair to them in the same as us. Again, you know, you wouldn't expect not to pay them. Why would they come? So I think that we've probably ought to accept or discuss that principle now, so that members and officers understand, you know, what we can tell these people when we're looking for them. And then I don't think, I mean, we might get something by December. I'd hope we might. May take longer, but as soon as we have those two people, I think we should bring them forward and get started. The other thing, of course, there's a recommendation that when the combined authority gets up and going, we should give that authority the opportunity to make an appointment. And that stems from the fact that, in spite of the changes to unitary and the change from districts, we haven't actually been able to readjust our members. And I can't see, looking at the parliamentary programmes ahead, I can't see much, if any, chance of that happening. And I do think that being connected to the combined authority in some way, and especially, you know, having someone here who can connect to the combined authority would be an advantage. And so I think that if we waited until that actually happened, it could become politically sensitive. And so I think it's quite important that if we were going to accept that principle, that we should do that now. And then when it gets up and running, I imagine there'd be a bit of a firewall the same, that, you know, we would ask for a nomination, and it might be a politician, it might even be an officer or an expert, better still. We would ask for a nomination from the mayor's office, and then this authority would endorse it or accept it. And so that way it would be possible, you know, not to accept it, although obviously you'd hope that. But that would be a safety net to make sure that we were in charge of that process. But some of you may find that controversial. Personally, I think it's a good idea. What do members think? Collins?
Should this maybe come to FASC first rather than go straight to them?
Well, I think this authority can make that view, and FASC can decide how to do it.
Okay,
And if members don't want to do it, now is the time to say. Malcolm?
No, I would just agree that 3 members will be involved in this. I mean, I'm perfectly happy to leave the 3 members to sort out the practical issues. It's not rocket science, and I'm sure I'll support whatever those 3 decide. I mean, there's clearly a range of views about remuneration, but I mean, principle of remuneration, I think, is agreed by everyone. And I'm just looking on it. the details of how this is going to work in practice will just is the
Yeah.
role of these three members working with the officers to
Yeah.
sort out.
Sure.
It's not a major discussion now.
But that can absolutely come to FASC and indeed needs to be honest, yeah.
In terms of the University Authority, I mean, same again, I agree with what you've just outlined. We clearly need somebody from the University Authority sat around this table if possible. And if we can take the initiative of saying we would want that to happen, and this is how we'd like to happen, unless government or whoever do something different, that's a good thing to do. So happy to proceed like that.
Yeah, we've all agreed on principle. I'm a little bit confused. I agree that, but if we want to launch it straight away, how much time have we got? I'm a bit confused because we talked about financial package. I don't quite entirely agree with what Jim said. I think it should be done on a meeting basis. The financial end of it. But I'm a bit confused. They need to know what they're coming. How soon do we have to do this? If we're trying to get people straight away, I mean, are you saying that the three officers will make a decision, then fetch it back? I mean, we can't attract people till we actually know what we're doing. It's going to be quite a short period of time. Sorry, Tom, you've got an answer.
I think I know what you're agreeing to. I hesitate to say this, but I think I know what you're agreeing. So look, I mean, looking at the paper and looking at the recommendations, you're approving some of the proposals that I outlined, namely that it's no more than 2 appointees, that it's an annual appointment. But that I think you agree. You're agreeing to the principle of remuneration, but you're also agreeing with Jim's further recommendation, which is that we create a small task and finish group to recommend the process by which we co-opt members and to recommend a remuneration package to be approved by FRASC.
And to take part in the search.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks. That's clear. Thanks.
So that's what I think you're agreeing to. I'm hoping Judith is she's frantically scribbling this down. So you're basically agreeing to create, instead of recommendation 1, you're creating a task and finish group.
I think formally that has.
So it does. I mean, I suppose it will kick the can down the road a little bit, but maybe that's fine in the context of actually getting a better outcome. But I think you'll move next, Jim, to what I suppose identify who actually forms that task and finish group, so we can actually, I suppose, do that next stage, as it were.
Sure. So if members interested could let me or Judith know. I think it's important that we have at least one lady on that process, and it might be that we'll find a way of agreeing who does it, even if it means drawing names out of a hat. But I don't think we need more than 3 in total. That would be unhelpful. So a bit off piece, but can I persuade you to go with that? Looks like it. Great. Okay. So Tom has kind of summed us up with this. No, I'm not lost yet. So as Tom said, we have set out some principles as to why we're appointing these people and what we want them to bring in the paper. The paper also narrows that down to seeking 2 individuals. Obviously, that could be revisited in future, but it narrows that down to delivering that objective through 2 individuals. One searched and put forward by EDI plus the working members. The other, we're going to search our youth voice organisation plus the working members, and if that doesn't work, we shall do something else. We've also agreed to the principle when it comes, or proposed to agree, that we invite the mayor's office to give us a co-option. All of those people will be put forward by the working group and officers for authority to appoint or co-opt. It would be a 1-year term with the possibility of another year, and I think that that's important because people don't stay young forever, and some churn is useful. I'll come to Christy. And the principle of proportionate remuneration, so that they're not disadvantaged or not treated differently to the existing members, is accepted, and how we do that will be worked out. I hope quite soon, because I think that's important for them to know, and it's important for us to get that sorted so we can get started. I don't think there is a particular time frame, but you know, as soon as we found appropriate people, that would come forward to us. So I think that's where we are, Tom. Are you okay with that?
I'm okay with that.
Did you want to? So could somebody propose that? Malcolm. Okay. I'll second that from the chair. So we've got. I'm coming. So we've got that recommendation, because we need to move this on. That's the recommendation on the table. Christine.
Thanks, Chair. I think all of that was right and agreed, excepting I would question the bit about the youth voice group. I don't know what the composition of that group is, and I think there was a strong feeling that there is a need to assess the skills that we wanted to bring. So to just say, well, we'll go to the youth voice because they happen to be an existing group, I don't think isn't what I would support.
Good. So what you're saying, I think we should start there, but finding the skills is more important than the place. I mean, I think that's absolutely right. You know, I think if that doesn't bring up someone who we think will be good, we need to look further. But it is something that the authority has fostered, and it's something that we've worked quite hard to get going. And so if that could produce a good person, it's already out there doing its work to try and, in the same way as EDI is doing, to be honest. EDI is doing that for its business. The youth voice group, hopefully, would be the conduit for young people to, and so it would be a logical place to start. But you know, if there isn't someone appropriate, obviously that's as it is, and we need to think again. I'm not saying that we should have someone from that regardless, and that's partly what the members would be there to help tease out. Do you want to make an amendment, or are you happy to just leave that comment on the table? Okay. So I think we have had a good discussion. It is an innovative and new frontier for us, and so bear with us. You know, if it doesn't work, we'll think of something else. But we've got a recommendation which Malcolm's put forward. I've seconded, which slightly amends the recommendation of the papers. I think Tom and Judith have got that. Are you happy to accept that and move forward? Brilliant. Thanks very much indeed. I think it's a really good thing for us and others to see us do. I may shut up and let you do the work now, isn't it? So we're on to item 10 is the staff and member code of conduct on page 12. Richard's going to take us through this.
There it is now. Richard. Nice to go through.
Thank you, Jim. Good morning, members. Good morning, everybody. Item 10 on your agenda. Again, the one you've all been waiting for. I know, say that every time. So the member code of conduct and the staff code of conduct. So right, there you go. So this is to seek your approval for light touch reviews of both the member code of conduct and the staff code of conduct. I've done the member code of conduct. Ian has done the staff code of conduct. Keith Wilkinson has kindly assisted me dealing with the member code of conduct. In your report, just paragraph 2.4, the key is the underlying principles in both codes remain sound, so no significant changes are proposed. In the members code in particular, Keith and I looked at the Local Government Association Model Code of Conduct. It's 16 pages long. There's a guide that goes with it, which is also 16 pages long. My view is that it's too complex to adopt that. Some national park authorities have adopted it. Importantly for me, Yorkshire Dales has not adopted it. They very much follow what I'm proposing here. Lake District National Park Authority have adopted it. They've got a very thorough 16-page code of conduct with a very thorough guidance document. So what I'm proposing here is in between those two. We're certainly not an outlier on this. A key point for me is that my view is that within the next 3 to 5 years, the whole issue of member and councillor conduct will be revisited. I think it's going to be triggered by parliamentary conduct issues. I think there's going to be a bit of a pushback. So I think in the next 3 to 5 years, there will be a revisit to this whole issue, primarily to do with Parliament, but that will then become councillors and that will then be you as members. So again, what I'm proposing is for the member code of conduct, just this light touch review. In relation to the staff code of conduct, again, if you look at paragraph 2.5 of the report, the changes are largely designed to make the code more easily readable, and the language used has been updated to reflect the modern working environment and a greater emphasis on the importance of equalities. And again, Ian will go through that document in detail after I've done the member code. Crucially, 2.6 in your report, we are proposing the withdrawal of our ethical framework. We just feel that it's just duplicating that information elsewhere, importantly in the annual governance statement. So we're looking at, unless you've got any objection, withdrawing the ethical framework. So I'll just take you to the first of the appendices. So that's the member code. I'll not go through, again, there's not a lot of changes, and hopefully they're very clear and self-explanatory, but I'll just identify 3 or 4. So paragraph 1, we've added in a reference to promoting an inclusive and diverse culture in the authority. Again, that's I think essential nowadays. Paragraph 5, adding in the need for impartiality and the exercise of our responsibilities in the interests of the community. Again, goes without saying, but I think it's good to include that. Just paragraph 10, interestingly, there were 2 paragraphs that have been in there for years and years and years, which were just duplicating what was in paragraph 9, and nobody spotted that until Keith spotted that. So we've taken out those 2 unnecessary paragraphs. And then right to the very end, 3 additions, paragraph 16, 17 and 18. So 16, again, reference to how you must use resources provided to you. And again, it's absolutely that, but it's good to expressly state that. Paragraph 17, an obligation or express reference to undertaking any training. And again, I think we do very well here with training, but again, this was Keith's suggestion to add that in, and I very much agree with that. That's good to have that. And then finally, paragraph 18, just a sort of broad catch-all that carrying out your role as a member, act lawfully and use reasonable care and diligence. And again, that's what you have to do, but I think it's good that we expressly state that. So they're the proposed changes to the member code. Just one matter that I haven't reported in the writing, but I wanted to mention verbally. Keith and I looked at the Local Government Association Model Code, the guidance document, and we talked about whether we should propose to include a guidance document. the guidance document for the model code, it just gives examples, it gives a bit of history, a bit of background. It adds a lot more words without adding a lot to the substance, but it's a matter for you. We could also create a guidance document to go with this. On the plus side, it would give more explanation, give examples. On the negative side, it would take time and money and might not be necessary. So, so again, in relation to the member code, I'm proposing those changes in the document. I'm leaving it to you to decide if you want us to explore further a guidance, local government guidance document. Keith, is there anything you want to say on the guide? I know you've mentioned it.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I mean, on the guide and on the code more generally, just to take a couple of steps back, when I initially looked at the model code, which, as Richard has said, 16 pages long, very comprehensive, and then I looked at yours, which is 3 pages. I was, put on inquiry, as it were, and thought, well, is this appropriate? But when you look at your code is I think commendably clear, and it's a very focused statement for members as to what is required of you in terms of conduct, and I think that's helpful. And the LGA code, in truth, is a little bit waffly. That said, there are always nuances to these things. You've got a very basic statement of what's required of you. As an example, treating others with respect. We all carry in our heads a sort of basic understanding of what that means, but in terms of your day-to-day dealings, if there's a cut and thrust of debate at these meetings and you disagree, to what extent may you robustly disagree? If you're holding officers to account at times, in terms of their performance, you want to be able to do that robustly. The LGA code and its guidance give you some detail in that's helpful to drill down to, I think, if you like to get a further understanding. So I think the guidance is a good thing. I take Richard's point entirely that you've got value for money concerns, which have been expressed by members in other context this meeting already. If you don't feel it's necessary, you won't want to set officers away producing it. There is, of course, the requirement that we're now proposing be introduced for training. So there's an opportunity for guidance to be developed as part of that training. So, I certainly would very much recommend the principle of guidance in some form. It's up for members whether you want that to be a formal document, whether you want it to be something that's developed through the training. So over to you guys really to kick that around and direct the officers.
Thank you. I think to hear the independent person saying it's commendably clear gives certainly me an awful lot of confidence, and less is more sometimes, isn't it? You can understand it, you can read it. The only thing that I would like to say, Richard, is my ears pricked up when you said you used the fact that we were going to withdraw the ethical framework. And I don't think you're saying that really, are you? You're saying that the ethical framework is already part of another document which we don't need to duplicate. So it's just language for me, but the thought of withdrawing an ethical framework just makes you feel a bit uncomfortable. So so that's just an observation. I think I'm right, aren't I? That it's elsewhere that we can refer to, and it still exists.
All that our ethical framework does is describe the way in which the authorities governed all the checks and balances that we have in place. So really, all that it does is pull together lots of information that already exists, and from that point of view, we felt it was a duplication. Our annual governance statement covers in some detail all the work we do around governance and the checks and balances that are in place. So we just felt it was a document in itself that's superfluous, although the contents most definitely aren't.
Yeah.
Malcolm?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think a short document of 3 pages is better than a long document of 16. And I think a short document without the guidance is better than a short document with the guidance, because at the end of the day, the first step, if someone's stepping out of line, is one of us will no doubt go up to them and say, be careful, you've stepped out of line. You don't put that in a document anywhere, but that's how it actually works. We make sure that people around this table do things reasonably and sensibly and appropriately.
Yeah, certainly. We've had our code of conduct for a long time, and collectively we've managed to keep ourselves out of trouble regards that for a long time anyway. So I'm in your hands, members. Ian and Keith have had a go through it, a slightly amended recommendation before you. Are you happy to accept that? Brilliant. I'll take that as unanimous.
Yeah, the second part of this report then is the staff code of conduct. Ian, can I leave you dealing with this?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Members, this I hope is reasonably straightforward. I've reviewed codes from a number of the parks just to make sure we were covering the right sort of areas, and our code is consistent with that from other MPAs. And as Richard said earlier, it's really been brought up to date because it was last reviewed a year or two before COVID, and as we're aware, the working world has changed significantly since then. There's certainly some enhanced wording around equality and diversity. New starters always get the code of conduct and their managers go through it with them as part of their induction. But I think a periodic review of it just gives me the opportunity to get this document in front of all staff again and remind them of their sort of individual obligations. We do use this, and certainly the most commonly used parts of this are around outside work, because we have lots of staff who work part-time and will have other jobs, and so we do talk around whether there's a conflict of employment. There rarely, if ever, is. So for me, this is a fairly straightforward update, but most importantly, gives us the opportunity to remind staff of their obligations. I'll stop there, Chair.
Let's see any of our officers complaining. Happy to accept the staff code of conduct. Brilliant. Yeah, I'll take that as unanimous as well.
Chair, for completeness, the recommendation then, so point one is approval of the two draft documents, which I think you've all in principle agreed. Second point is that you ask myself and Ian to find suitable ways in which to publicise the revised codes. And I would just add, just for clarification, in relation to the guide, a clear yes or no. Do you want us to explore a guide or not? I think the answer is not, but so I can ideally just resolve on those 3 points, Chair.
So I got on the wrong recommendation.
Page 13.
Yeah. I think members are happy not to explore the further guidance, if that's okay. Yeah, is that okay?
Okay.
I think that's the decision that we've come to.
Okay, and then Ian and I to find suitable ways in which to publicise the two revised codes.
Absolutely, and members need to have that too. Just, I dare say it'll be on the website in the pack. I would just say to you too. I know over the years on the circuit, there's a number of times that national park chairs have come to me and said, "You're really lucky. You know, your members all get on and work well together, not like some of our lot." And I say, no. I said nobody works harder at it than us, and it's a real privilege actually. But it is noticed on the circuit that our members, you know, we may have some differing views and some arduous discussions at times, but we come away from that, you know, accepting a collective way forward and getting behind that. And you know, you've got two choices: you either work together nicely or you don't. And we do, and that's a real credit to the whole organisation that others see us that way.
Chair, can I just add, I do agree. I've worked with several local authorities, and nobody does it better than we do. we resolve it well, full and thorough debate, but I think we conduct ourselves better than anybody.
Careful what you wish for, but up to now. Thank you, members. Okay, so on to 11 then. We've got 2 tree preservation orders, so page 22.
Morning, members. Can everyone hear me all right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. So this first one, it's Appleton Le Moors. We had a phone call from the owner of this house who had inherited it from her father who had recently passed away to ask us about the possibility of removing this tree. So when we got this information, we put a tree preservation order on it. Can you next slide, please? So these are the basics. I'll show you the picture in a minute. So we served it in June. It's a very large sycamore. There aren't that many large trees on the roadside in this village, and we lost a couple here in recent years. So we thought it was particularly important to keep this one. I think it's at least 70 years old. It may be a bit older, but we can date it to there because it predates the current house. And there is some wall damage. So this is a bit of a consideration. And I'll show you the pictures of that in a moment. It gave a tempo score of 16. Tempo is one of the methods that we use to just assess where we are. It just gives us a bit of justification. I'll explain that a bit more later. But it's a tree evaluation method for preservation orders. Next slide, please. So here you can see the tree. It's lovely. And as you can see down the street, there aren't that many other trees in such a prominent position in the village, and everybody comes past this if you go through the village. Next slide. So there is some wall damage. We've discussed this with the owners, so they were a bit concerned about it. They are now going to repair this themselves, which they're quite happy to do. They obviously had their concerns, but speaking to them and putting the preservation order on, they feel quite happy that they now have, they at least know where they stand with this tree, and they like the tree. But this was obviously a concern for them. This is not a very well used drive. I did go and ask building control for North York Council about this, because they have enforcement powers over dangerous structures that might pose a threat to the public, which would include trees, but obviously walls specifically. I sent them all the details. They didn't want to come out and have a look at it, but they said this wouldn't meet their criteria for any concerns they have. So from a public health point of view, public safety point of view, we feel that there aren't any concerns. Obviously, this section is a bit worse, but as I say, they are currently repairing that. Next slide. We did get some objections from the neighbours and the parish council. Obviously, the wall, that was one of the main objections. We felt there is an engineering solution. There's always an engineering solution if you throw enough money at something, obviously. But we felt that the Stanford principle should apply here. So if there's a if there's a balance, if you have competing needs of people's personal enjoyment and the natural beauty of the park, Sanford principle says that we should favour the latter. We also had objections about the overhanging branches and the leaf drop. The overhanging branches, this is obviously a common issue with trees. There is a legal right to cut branches back to your boundary line. So we don't feel that does not interfere with the placing of a TPO, because you can have that legal right. There's unfortunately, there's never been any decision on whether the TPO itself or the legal right to cut back to the boundary takes precedence. So in that circumstance, we generally follow the primary legislation, which is the tree preservation order, and we ask people to appeal to apply to us if they want to do work to a preservation order, even if it's something they have otherwise a legal right to. But they have done that, and we've been out and agreed what work they can do. This is the neighbours. This is on the leaf and sap drop. You may have read this in your notes, but obviously these are issues that all trees cause. So we can't really justify them as reasons to disqualify a tree preservation order, because that's what trees do. They will drop sap and they drop leaves in autumn. And if they're in a built environment, they are going to affect somebody. But if we want trees in our built environment, we have to, or at least somebody has to tolerate these slight annoyances. And we also had an objection that the tree is oversized. I mean, I would say that the tree has reached its natural height. They tend to grow very quickly to their natural height and then fill out. And this one it kind of does fill the space that it's in, but it isn't going to get that much bigger. They tend to just spread out in the trunk from this point on. So I feel, we feel that it hasn't outgrown its position, basically. And this is just to reiterate the Sanford principle. You can all read that. As I said, this is the tempo assessment that we go through. There's no regulatory or legal basis for this, but most local authorities will use tempo assessments to. It basically just gives you more confidence that you can justify placing a preservation order on a tree. And it goes through these criteria. What's the condition of the tree? In this case, the tree is in good condition. It looks very healthy. How long are we going to be able to keep it in all probability? I think that's a reasonable time frame. An open grown tree like that in good health, it could get up to 200, 250 years old. So I think it'll be there for a good few decades yet. What is the visibility like? In this case, obviously, it's extremely visible. And other factors. I mean, I've gone none here. Obviously, the wall is a bit of a factor, but basically the owner still has a duty of care there. So when we're looking at the tree, we want to assess its value to the park. The other factors are more about, has it got poor form or something like that. This, if you score enough on this section, you can go on to this section. What is the threat to the tree? Obviously, in this case, it's a foreseeable threat because she was asking about taking it out. And that leads us on to the decision. So we added up and we've got 16. So I feel that's a reasonable justification for placing it. Preservation.
Recommendation. So
sorry, Chair. And we just weighed it up against our management plan objectives. We feel that it meets these two outcomes.
Great, thanks. So the recommendation is there that the CPO be confirmed. Just reminding the process, Tom or Nathan, that we've been through in doing this. So,
I mean, very, very simple terms, and this applies to both the TPO series that they've they come to me as chief executive to approve. So both of these TPOs have had some degree of office scrutiny from myself, as well as our tree and woodland specialists. They're only being brought to members because we've had a certain number of complaints about the TPO that's been imposed on both trees. Otherwise, this is dealt with as a delegated matter under our scheme of delegation.
Okay, thanks. So, open the members. Any questions for Nathan or Heather?
Yes, if you've had discussions with North Yorkshire Council, I presume, is it a public right of way? Or is it just a permissive access, that road where that path where the tree comes onto?
That's on their property. So that's the people that own the tree own that drive, basically. That's just one of the entrances.
Okay, the only people have access on there.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Janet?
For clarification, is there anything that can be done in terms of pruning the tree, as the neighbours have suggested, to assist them, because obviously their concerns are that it's affecting, is that something that can be done?
Yeah, they are doing it. Yeah.
Thank you.
They did.
Sorry if I missed that in the report.
Yeah, so they put an application in to do some tree work on it.
Thank you.
And I went out and met them, and we agreed, the right work to do.
Dave?
The stonework near the tree, does that come under the preservation order as well, as far as the method it's actually put back in, so it doesn't actually damage the tree itself? Is it dry stone walled or is it infill walled?
I don't know. I'm not an engineer. It did look just like a dry stone wall, but I imagine there must be something, because it's a retaining wall, so it can't be.
And that's what I was worried about, just, that it doesn't actually damage the tree itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I've dealt with these before, sometimes, if it's a double skin, you put a single skin in to allow for a bit of root expansion, or you can bridge over the roots where they are.
Can we make sure that is actually done? Make sure that it is done, because that is very important, really, that the tree at its base is not. You say it's got to its maximum height, or getting to there.
Yeah.
Is that the same with the girth size then? Because I'm just thinking, will it push the wall straight out again?
Well, it will. Yeah, like I say, they tend to grow very quickly, so the trunk expands quite quickly. But once it's reached its natural height, then the trunk will expand a bit more slowly, as it. But yes, it will continue to expand.
Yeah. I can understand the principle of expansion after you've reached your maximum height.
Yes. Right, thank you very much.
But slowly, it should spread a bit more slowly now.
Mine was.
Colin?
Yes, Chair. Sorry, I can't support any TPO within a village that is going to create havoc with buildings close by. The root structure goes underneath, it goes as far as what the height of the tree goes. It's obviously taking the wall out at the moment. It'll be going under the footpath to the front or to the road as well. But, there's plenty of space to plant more trees within the countryside that isn't creating that havoc in the middle of a village or next to the farmhouse. And surely, we could we're on about planting, 17% of the country with trees. Is one going to make that much difference? We're expecting the village to support us further down the line. if we put the preservation order on, we aren't going to take control of that tree. We're going to leave it to the guy who owns the trees, and he has to then insure it against damage to anywhere else. I mean, I would have said the best option was to have the tree taken down, plant more trees further away from the roadside, and that way we'll still get the same carbon sequestration, whatever, and everybody be happy in the future. But it's going to come back to us at some point that there's a branch come off this tree and it's caused this damage. But I'm sorry, I can't support the TPO on it.
Thanks, Colin.
Could we just see the photograph again of the tree in place?
Sure.
Here it is, Jim. The next one. Yeah.
Good. Okay, and also, I'd start by saying I know this area pretty well. It's just down the road from where I live, and I'd also commend the occupant for coming to ask us, because it's not beyond the realms of history that things have been done to trees, and then it's too late, isn't it? And so credit to them for that, because I do know this, and if you see the picture on the right, that tree takes the sun away from the front of that house all summer long, and from its front garden, because it's situated just immediately at the south corner of the house. And so you can quite understand why, it's a really serious limiting factor on the amenity of that property. And I totally accept that, and I feel sorry for them, I have to say. I certainly wouldn't want it at the corner of my house, and local people have got mixed views. You said about pruning the tree and some ambiguity about whether pruning the tree to your boundary was first or second. And what I would say is that you can see by the way that tree's situated right in the corner, if you did prune it to the boundary, it would be the end of the tree. That's not feasible on that tree.
That's the boundary here. Sorry, this line here.
Okay.
It's pretty sort of branches back on that side rather than over the road.
After the wall.
Yes.
The wall.
South of the wall.
The wall of the shadow path.
Right, but still, I mean, that we're looking at the boundary fence there, and if the owner of the common and village green wanted to prune it back to his boundary, that would be the same thing.
Well, this is we've agreed where he can cut it back to.
Yeah, so
to be best to keep the shape of the tree and to relieve some of his.
So following on from that, what I was saying is that I hope that in that ambiguity that there would be some reasonable pruning that would maintain the viability of the tree and give the neighbours as much amenity as possible within that context. And I hope that we could be quite proactive in doing as much as we could to get agreement on that. I'm not sure how good the agreement you've got is, but back to the cut and lift, the stick and lift, as we say. That we have our policies as with planning policies, and the assessment in the conservation area of this tree is that it's important, and to make an exception to that really rather undermines all the other TPOs that we put in. So I feel with some reluctance, I do have to support this, because that's what the TPO is all about. But I do have sympathy and commend the owners for coming to us, and I hope within that context we can be as accommodating of their needs as we can. It is a dry stone wall. The tree is kind of pushing to the boundary at the front there and the side, and I'm sure that there's a way of, by agreement, extending the wall out a little bit, or making it so that it doesn't actually impact on the tree. But that's all to do as well, and I don't know if we had some parish grant or the traditional boundaries scheme or something might be something that would help them with that, because it does seem, there's an awful lot of stick, and a bit of help would be great as well. There goes a plea from a local parish guy.
So I was just sorry. I was just going to say they do like the tree, the owners, and they're happy now that the tree is going to stay.
Good. Well, that's really good news. If you'd said that in the first place.
I mean, the objections come from, they were obviously concerned about the wall, and there's an objection from the neighbour, but
okay. Anybody else? So by and large, I think we can take a vote on confirming the officer's provisional recommendation. You can be for it or against it. All in favour of confirming the TPO? Is Richard there?
Richard's gone by.
No, see, okay.
I can see 2 arms not raised.
Is anyone against? The 2 against it. That is confirmed. Next one, please, Nathan.
sorry. This was an emergency one that we placed. We got wind from some of the locals in Hinderwell, got wind that this tree was about to be felled at the weekend. So they rang us on the Friday, so we put a TPO on it straight away to stop it being felled. It's in a fairly similar position to the previous one, right on the street. That says 70 years old. I may have transposed them. I might have left that one in. But yeah, so we said this as an emergency TPO on that Friday. It's even slightly closer to the boundary than the other one, and again extremely visible. It's on the main street through the village. This one is 70 years old. There is some damage to a wall that's about this high, pushing it out slightly, and the people in the Methodist chapel next door say there's some cracking on their concrete forecourt as well. That's the total amount of damage that we can see. So this is it. The form is obviously nothing like as good as the previous Sycamore, but this form is because there used to be some power lines running down this street. So they were there's another tree just further along this street, a beech tree, a copper beech, that's also been given that because they've been just pruning for years and years around these power lines. Unfortunately, as well, North Yorkshire Council have placed street light right in the crown. There wasn't a street light here before. This was placed here. Just I think 2020, 2021, something like that. So that's really unfortunate. That means that obviously you've still got to prune the tree to the same shape to keep it away from the street light. The objections to this mainly came from the chapel. The owners of the tree did send in the objections, but they were again mainly concerned with the effect that it would have on the chapel. Now they've said proximity of roots might cause damage to the chapel. At the moment, there isn't any evidence of any structural damage to the chapel. I've tested that. You'll probably have seen in your reports. I did look up the soil type. It's not a shrinkable clay soil. That is the soil that you would normally expect to get any subsidence damage on. I would say if there's no evidence of any subsidence damage at this point, considering the building and the tree have coexisted for at least 70 years, it's unlikely to happen now. They did list some maximum distances that trees are supposed to be from buildings, but there aren't any. There's no regulated maximum distances. Most of those figures come from the insurance industry, who have been dealing with cases of subsidence. It's usually, it might be something like they've had a case where a sycamore 12 metres away from a tree has caused subsidence damage. Therefore, they say no sycamore should be planted nearer than 12 metres. Obviously, there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of sycamores that will be closer to buildings than that without causing any damage. But so these are the insurance industry figures are not based on any kind of science. They also mentioned the potential damage to the chapel from overhanging branches. Again, the owners have a duty of care to keep those branches back. I talked about non-actionable nuisances last time. Those are leaf drop and sap drop, the kind of things that you would naturally associate with trees. They are annoying, but the owner doesn't have a legal duty to remedy them. If branches are touching property, that's an actionable nuisance, so they have a legal duty to remedy that. So really, that's up to them. We are considering the tree from an amenity point of view. We wouldn't disqualify it from a TPO simply because it's touching the property. That's entirely the owner's duty. And the other objection was obviously the effect on the street light. It is a reasonable objection, but it's a bit of an invidious position that the council have put that street light directly in the crown of the tree. And again, unfortunately, it does now place the duty on the owner to keep that street light clear. But obviously, we still feel that because it makes such a contribution to the amenity of the village, because there are, again, not many trees that are actually on the street. So you see it, everybody sees it, they're passing through the village. We feel that it still meets these two outcomes of the management plan.
Thanks, Nathan. Opens up to members. Heather?
Yeah, obviously it's not the most attractive tree, which it's always usually where it is, and we're not going to go to the whys and wherefore why North Yorkshire Council put the lamppost there, but there we go. I've got some sympathy for anyone who has to have a TPO, and I'm not saying it should, but really we're putting an incumbent on people to have to spend their money on, you know, and looking after the trees. I've had this complaint before, not to do with national parks of TPOs, but I do find it quite hard for someone, you know, you don't know their financial circumstances, and if they're responsible, we're putting this extra sort of pressure on them that they've got to maintain and they've got to do it in line, and they can't just go out there and trim it off with getting a man down the road to do it. It is quite a burden for them, and I do have some sympathies for this. I mean, there isn't any funding available. We tell them what they should be doing with it, but they have to pay for it basically, and I have got some sympathy for them really. I find it difficult sometimes that tree particularly to me isn't attractive, but it's not the fault of the tree, it's where it is. But that is I'm a little bit happy with that. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, Chair, just as before really, but if the members of the chapel can put the tree back so it's not overhanging their boundary, then that tree's going to look pretty sad, isn't it? And there isn't going to be much of it left, to be fair. And is it then going to be better to, you know, it's a tree, it's a decent tree, but it's in the wrong place in a village. So really, if the chapel cut the tree back on the other side, you have to trim the tree for the lamppost. You know, is it better not to put this TPO on it? And you know, let's move forward from that, because it isn't a bonny tree at all, really.
Thank you, Chair.
It is, the chapel weren't proposing to do that, where they did write a letter to the owners to say, you know, it's on our roof, and the owners have now cut it back from the property. So I don't think that the chapel aren't gonna do any more on it.
But they aren't doing it yet. But you wait till a branch drops off that and goes through Chapel Road. Then who's going to be in charge?
But that, I mean, all trees have the potential to drop branches.
We'll just go one at a time, please. Was it Janet next, and then Christine? Yeah.
Thank you. The report outlines damage to the building as well, and I don't know, and I don't want to be provocative. It's not my style, but it seems inconsistent that the detail that we're getting into today, and then there's been a lamppost put there in the crown, and it seems as though that there's rules for one and not for another. So I don't know what process one has to go through to get a lamppost put up. But for that then to determine the future of the tree and the shape of the tree, it seems to be quite a unique situation in terms of considering a TPO, because I would be unhappy if I had to spend my money shaping something that wasn't particularly attractive. But more importantly, what has the damage to the Grade 2 listed building, what is being done about that? Because that is being associated with the tree too. So this feels really quite a difficult one to, I appreciate officers have got a really important job to do, but it feels a really difficult one to agree to.
There isn't any damage
The report
to
mentions
the building.
The report mentions damage. Previous work had to be done because there was damage to the building, both from the council and did it not? I've read that.
This low wall is being pushed out slightly.
I thought there was potential damage to the chapel as well, and that was a concern about that.
They are concerned about potential damage to the chapel.
Right.
There isn't any evidence
Right.
of
Okay.
damage.
Thank you.
Okay, I go to Christine and then Jai.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, it could present itself as being tricky, but I would say, you know, with anything that we cherish and think is important, which obviously that's, you know, what we're here to do in the park is to look at nature and the environmental things in the first instance. I think we would put ourselves in a very difficult position if somebody came along, you know, at any time and damaged something. We said, well, oh, it's been damaged now, so let's just spin it. You know, we wouldn't do that with other things. And I think we need to take that principle forward in terms of the tree. So yes, it's extraordinarily unfortunate that the council for some reason has put a lamppost in the middle of a tree. I mean, that's just unfathomable for their purposes as well as for the tree. But regardless of that, I think, you know, there's a reason why a tree preservation order fits this tree. It probably wouldn't fit every tree that you came upon. That's why there's an assessment process, and so I support the officer's recommendation.
Jai?
Yeah. It's just a question really. You said that there were overhead wires there at one time, which presumably have all gone underground now. So is that going to be exactly the same it is moving forward, or is there going to be some more growth on that? Because it is only a light that is been put there, as we've said, for some reason known only to whoever. So will the tree benefit from having the wires removed? So it will look a little.
It would have done. I mean, it will grow out.
Yeah.
From that point, but obviously,
there is
the owners have a statutory duty to keep the streetlight clear. Now.
Yeah.
Okay, members. Well, we'll have to come to a view, and obviously, you know, this has gone through a delegation process, and officers have done that and put these on, and it is for us to confirm or not. I think my own comment is that what's disappointing about this is that all these, you know, without the TPO on, the opportunity to have a pretty handsome tree has been lost because of power lines and because of a street light. And you shouldn't have to put a TPO on to prevent people from thinking about the consequences of doing those things. You know, it's ridiculous, isn't it? If in a village conservation area, the problem with trees is lack of long-term planning always. And, you know, it would be nice to think that villages were looking at places where they would plant trees which would fulfill their total potential for hundreds of years and not have unacceptable impact upon people. And you look at lots of city landscapes and stuff where that has been done and it looks fantastic, doesn't it? But it's always nip and tuck, and somehow there's never any complete winner in this game, and that's always disappointing. So there's something on the agenda later on that might help the streetlight situation, but we'll come to that when the time comes. For here and now, we're being recommended to confirm the officer's TPO, and for whatever reasons, I feel bound to. It's a shame that it hasn't been. The tree hasn't been allowed to fulfil its full potential until now. I still think it is a significant and quite well-grown tree, which probably, you know, for here and now could be kept to see how things go. We might even get the street light moved. I think it's a straight vote, members, really. Do you want to come in, George?
I mean, clearly the street light has been an issue during this process. And I was just wondering if we need to write to North Yorkshire just to highlight this point, because we don't want it to happen time and again. And I think it's something to raise given the difficulty that it's caused in this particular situation.
Thanks, George. I mean, the whole thing does make us look a bit daft as public bodies sometimes. Okay, so all those in favour of confirming the TPO, please show. Can someone have a count, please?
That's 11 in favour.
All those against?
2, 3,
3,
4. 4 against.
4 against. Any abstentions?
No abstentions.
So that is confirmed.
That's confirmed.
Obviously, you know, future applications can be made, and we'll be dealt with. Remember, I'm minded to just have a short comfort break before we go into forest design plans, if that's okay, Matt.
Yeah, good idea.
But I just wanted a quick comment. I mean, our standing orders have brought those to us at full authority, and it does feel to be there's a kind of a bit of a mismatch in mindset to confirming TPOs, to looking at objections, and I know Tom raised the question at briefing. You know, is this really the right place to be spending 3/4 of an hour doing 2 TPOs? They're very contentious and you know, hot issues for the individuals involved, and so it's absolutely right that we should take care, listen to objections, make sure that the process is done properly. I'm just not quite sure that full authority is the place to be doing that. It feels like a job for climate planning to me. Go on, Tom.
Yeah, look, I think just I suppose just to set the context. So hopefully, people online can hear me if I project a little bit further across the room. But under our scheme of delegation, I already have the delegated authority to approve tree preservation orders. The reason we bring them back for confirmation is custom and practice. I believe, Mark, just remind me. I think is it where we received more than three complaints.
Yeah, I think it's if there's objections or if the decision is a balanced one where it's unfair on one person to call it. So it's, you know, weighing up the pros of retaining the tree against, you know, the owner's disbenefits, if you like.
Yeah.
Where it needs to be the authority rather than, you know, an individual. And I think that also stacks up if, you know, later on as well, in that how we've arrived at the decision, because obviously we're putting the TPO on ourselves and also confirming it ourselves. So it's like judging jury.
I think the question for me a little bit like the delegation that officers operate under with regard to planning decisions, which means that 90% of our planning decisions are delegated, is what are the criteria that require us to bring a decision, or in this case, a confirmation of a decision, back to members, and I do wonder whether we should go away and just look at whether we've set the filters a little bit too low, because I think the level of delegation that we have as officers under planning is actually even higher than that. So I do wonder whether we ought to just take another look at that again and see whether it's appropriate for us to bring it back with that level of concern.
George?
I just mentioned that at the North Yorkshire Council level, these kind of applications go to the planning committee according to the delegation procedure.
I mean, it seems to me that from what Mark and Thomas said, it's right that there should be an element of oversight or backstop where things are contentious. And it's important, I think, for the public who are dealing with regulatory functions to see that they have some opportunity. I mean, I don't think there's a legal right of appeal to a TPO, is there?
There is. Well, there's two routes you can take. Once it's confirmed, you can take it to the High Court on a point of law. Obviously, that's a bit more of a difficult route. Your only other option is you apply to us to have work carried out, and then if we refuse that, you can appeal that decision.
So you could appeal works, but not the imposition of the TPO.
If we refuse permission to fell a tree in a subsequent application, you can appeal that decision.
And how would you appeal that?
To the Secretary of State.
Right. Because I mean, the thing about our planning laws is that you do have an automatic right of appeal, and going to the High Court is quite expensive, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so I think it's right that we should have, some form of democratic backstop to confirm those things. But the levels and where that happens does feel like a job for planning. So, could we take that away, Tom? And it would take a tweak to standing orders, but we could bring something back to regularise that. And having a similar sort of approach to planning would seem to me to be right. Go on, Nathan.
I was just going to say, yeah, in the regulations for the TPO, it says that as we are proposer and judge of the TPOs, all authorities should consider how best to demonstrate that you are. Like you say, you've got to be fair, and you've got to be seen to be fair.
Yeah, I think it would be a good exercise to be seen to do that, and maybe just update our process. Malcolm?
Yeah, I think it's right that we look at that. You mentioned should in the future they go to planning committee. I mean, I'm very happy with that, and I get the feeling that there's a lot of nods around the table. I don't know whether we can take that decision now or just leave it. Personally, I prefer to take that decision now if that's the way we want to go forward.
Yeah, well, I think that clearly the serious bet is that we'll have to change our standing orders.
Well, I just need to go away and check whether you need to change the standing order, or whether this is whether it's actually custom and practice as opposed to something that's set out in standing orders.
Well, I think that from this conversation, we'll do what needs to be done to get it to planning, and it feels right to deal with that there. Yeah. So members, we'll just have who? Oh, sorry, Chris, I couldn't see.
These used to go to planning, unless the standing orders change specifically, they can go to either. There was sometimes a matter of urgency, which is why they went to planning, because it met more frequently. I don't want to encourage it to go to planning, but actually TPO legislation does come through planning legislation, so it does mention it.
Yeah, and it just feels to fit better with the sort of mindset that we have when we're determining planning applications. Okay, we'll have a 5 minutes comfort break, and so then we'll reconvene just before past. Back to it then. Item 12 is no, sorry, it says 13. It's Wastmore Forest Design Plan.
Morning. We've already talked quite a lot about trees, so I really will try and rattle through this for you. I'm going to talk about item 13, Wastmore and Prye Rig, and Cope Moor in the same presentation, and then we'll come back at the end to the recommendation for them both, because I think some of the discussion and questions may be the same for both. So if you're happy, Chair, for me to do that.
Just as you please, Mark. Thank you.
I will. I know that there's some new members who perhaps haven't seen any of these reports, so I just thought it would be worth reminding that it is National Parks procedures that all forest plans, they used to be called forest design plans, but now called forest plans, are reported to members. And that dates back from a meeting in 2006, where there are procedures for consultations on a range of forestry aspects was agreed. So starting with Wastmore and Prye Rig, it's the woodlands that are very apparent to you when you're travelling out from Helmsley on the A170 towards Thirsk. The A170 is just along the top there, and north of Ampleforth. Prior to 1924, prior to the Forest Commission taking hold of it, it was already well wooded, with the exception of Wastmore itself in the middle here. The yellow areas are leasehold and the blue areas are freehold, and obviously with Forestry England, all the freehold ownerships are open access. We have a significant area of ancient woodland on the site. That's in the red and the yellow, the red being the plantations on ancient woodland sites, and the yellow ancient semi-natural woodland. And it's forms part of the ancient woodland area within quite a significant area of other ancient woodlands nearby. So this is basically what the Forest Commission are going to do with it. The brown beige colour is to be predominantly broadleaved going forward, and the blue areas are predominantly conifer. Where it's not coloured in, that's to be managed as open space. So not surprisingly, most of the broadleaved elements are situated in and around the ancient woodland, and the predominantly conifer is on the plateau. That's what the current species looks like, and with sort of modern forestry and the way things are going, we've sort of moved away from single blocks of single species, and so the picture is becoming increasingly complicated to map. Perhaps equally or more important than species, it's the type of management is also very important in these forests. Here we have the light blue colour is something which I'll come on to in a minute, called shelter wood, in this case strip shelter wood, which is different to doing clear fells. The grey areas are the areas that will be clear felled in the future, and the sort of pinky weird colour is areas of a different type of shelter wood, the group shelter wood, which is more suited to sloping ground. Forest Commission use this term lower impact silvicultural systems. So basically any alternatives to clear fell and replant or restock. So for a number of the forests, the Forestry England are adopting this strip shelter wood, which we wanted to look at, and which is one reason why I thought I'd just quickly mention it here because obviously it could have some landscape implications. But so we've been looking at that in some detail, and this is one that's been recently done, and this is an area that's been done a bit more previously. So it's just they just take out narrow strips about 1.5 times the height of the surrounding trees, and really the aim is to retain woodland conditions that would be lost by doing a clear fell. And it also encourages the use of natural regeneration because you have some seed trees, so there will be a greater range of species hopefully get going in addition to the ones that they plant. One of the key things I'm interested in this method is that it does allow for the retention, wrong button, of mature trees within the strips, and that's one thing that I think is missing from plantation forestry when it's a clear fell system, is that there is very limited scope for retaining older trees. Landscape. Most of the woods are sort of visible from fairly fast roads and mostly at some distance. This is the A170, and here you can actually see the impact of the strips. I was a bit concerned at how the strips would look, but they tend to leave the edge trees, and as long as the strips are reasonably short and not, done in a sort of reasonably random manner, I don't think it looks too bad. Obviously, views of the steeper slopes from Byland Abbey there, and this is sort of edge treatment, which we sort of call fuzzy forestry, where they will fell and thin adjacent to public rights of way and the highway, and allow those to naturally regenerate in a slightly more naturalistic manner. As I've said, it's generally the forest is viewed from distance. It's mainly arable land surrounding it, and along with the edge, allowing broadleaves and so on to go along the edge. It's felt that the impact on the landscape character is acceptable. So just a few discussion points, really. The key ones that I've drawn out from the plan. Members have asked before about how previous plans have been sort of judged to be successful or not, and so now Forestry England are providing us with their own internal assessments of the previous plan. So I think it's important to look at those, but also to make our own judgments as well. We think that internal and external landscape impacts are being reasonably well addressed. Gradual restoration of all the ancient woodland within the forest is underway. And just one thing for consideration is that rhododendron continues to be a threat within the woodland. Forestry England are doing work on that, but we acknowledge that it's beyond eradication at the current time. So I'll go straight on to Cote Moor. This is east of Great Ayton, just south of Rosebery Topping. This is all leasehold land, so there is no, it's not designated as open access land, but the woodland is well used by the public. Again, a bit like the other one, it was wooded before Forest Commission took over. And there's just one small block, 12-hectare block of ancient woodland down in the bottom left-hand corner there. But again, it is connected with other ancient woodlands nearby. This is the overall plan for the woodlands. The steep areas, the ancient woodland areas, and some areas near the parking along the main road there and along the bank to the north will be broadleaved, but the plateau and the more gentle slopes here will, in blue, will remain as predominantly conifer. We have open land here, and an area of sort of natural colonization here, which is partly to keep open habitats open, but also to improve landscape impacts of the wood. Again, management type here, the pinky sort of colour is a group shelter wood. So again, no clear felling in those areas. The grey is clear fell. These are, again, steeper slopes, difficult to do anything other than clear fell. They may be able to do something less invasive at the time, and the blue areas are open or other habitats. From a landscape point of view, it's very visible, highly visible from many public viewpoints and from far away. In particular, this is particularly the forest used to have a straight edge here, but that's been cleared, and that's certainly an improvement over what was there previously. This is the ancient woodland area, which is now all the conifers have been cleared from the ancient woodland. Broadleaves have been retained, a bit of wet woodland in the bottom, very important habitat, and a bit of planting to speed up the process of restocking it with native broadleaves. The bottom one's just a view from one of the felling areas in the woodland, but just indicate how important it is in terms of landscape. Roseberry topping, obviously a very iconic viewpoint, and I didn't really have the time to go and go round there and take the photograph back. So discussion points. Ancient woodland is well underway. Previous plan objectives have broadly been met. We're very pleased that they're using the group shelterwood system here because of the visibility. And they have been doing quite a bit of control of rhododendron here, and there's a bit more to be done. And some very useful landscape improvements have been delivered. That is it really, in a nutshell. And so if we can do both the recommendations at the same time, that would be helpful.
Okay. Just remind me which page the recommendations are on. The recommendation on 34.
Yeah, they are just repeated here, Jim.
Is that still there?
I think so, yeah.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you. Yeah, so those are the recommendations from the two reports. We've had a look at the presentations for both together. Members' comments or views, Heather?
See, I live right under the Catcooks Monument, and I was, first of all, I'd like to say the deforestation of Easby Moor, it's changed the face of the Catcooks, the black iconic monument. At the time, we were a little bit concerned, but all those trees came out probably now, but probably 5 or 6 years, maybe it's longer now. And it's a great improvement. Yeah, I fully support that. And I live, as I say, it's in my parish, and yeah, it's important that it was an ancient woodland, and yeah, I just wanted to support it. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. Steve?
Thanks, Chair. In the first instance, I want to declare a non-prejudicial interest in the woodland management plans because I am employed by Natural England who also has statutory responsibility to comment or on woodland management plans. It's non-prejudicial because I'm not involved with anybody who makes any decisions at Natural England. I've had no conversations with anybody at Natural England, and they won't come and ask me about anything either. So this is a pretty clear line, but just to be plain about that. I do have some questions, Mark, if you don't mind, and if you'll indulge me. I think I did ask previously around, success measures, etc. Both of these woodland plans come with a list of priority species, which is lovely, but it doesn't tell us anything about how those priority species have benefited, not benefited, etc., from any works that the Forestry Commission has done on the previous plan, or any indication of how they'll ensure, other than by thinking about them as they go about what they were going to do anyway, they'll thrive in future. So could you provide any insight on that, or is it as opaque as it appears?
Well, it is as it appears, and I suppose this is a strategic plan, and it's very much an oversight, and it's really if they were going into that level of detail, it would make it obviously a much longer document. So there's nothing more that I can sort of say in that. I mean, obviously our ecologist looks at the plans, and we pick up on anything specific that we know about those, the forests in discussion. But it is, quite general, really.
I'm just thinking that in no other situation that I see as part of this association authority would we enable and condone the management of broad swathes of land without any detail about how it was actually going to affect the wildlife. So I think it's a pretty significant omission of these plans for our purposes. But I take your point that's not available, so I'll move on a little bit. In the Coatmore forestry plan, I noticed that there's reference in the plan to there being some peaty soils, but bizarrely on that one, we have no soils map, whereas on the other woodland plan, we do have the soils map. And there doesn't seem to be any comment in the plan about how they'll address forestry on peat as part of that plan. Is there information that we're missing, or is the Forestry Commission Forestry England avoided commenting on peat and woodland?
No, I think it's that's partly a victim of trying to get these through as soon as we can. The Coatmore plans were the final plans. Sorry, the Wastmore plans were the final plans, and the Coatmore one isn't a complete list of plans. And I was hoping to have those plans by today, but I've been on holiday for 2 weeks, and surprise, surprise, they haven't. They weren't in my inbox this morning. So we will see those. They will, in the final version. But in order to get it in front of members, I was, restricted to the draft plans.
Right. I just a third point, if I may, and then I'll cede the floor. So thank you for indulging me. On the Coatmore plan also, and I think in your commentary, but there's reference to Clearfell, particularly on the steeper slopes, and it may have been implied that there wasn't any other choice but Clearfell on the steeper slopes, and I would dispute that. I think there's no other choice when you consider cost. But as with other areas that this authority considers, that isn't our primary consideration. And it's an issue in the sense of Clearfell on steep slopes, both from a landscape view and also in the sense of greater erosion issues on those steeper slopes. And I know the Forestry Commission, or Forestry England, apologies, I keep mistaking it, has ways and means, and they've got approaches that they take to Clearfell. But I think there are alternatives, and it would be worthwhile in their final report, in addition to including something about the peat soils, including something about why they think there's no alternative to Clearfelling on steep slopes.
you can certainly ask those questions. I think the other one of the other reasons for Clearfell's Cote Moor was also for the adjacent to well-used footpaths. So so for some of those, there's a slight risk when you do the continuous cover methods of wind throw. So they're feeling that for some areas adjacent to well-used paths, that was the main reason for using Clearfell. But we will ask that question for sure.
Thank you. Patrick?
Thank you, Jim. Just following up on some of Christian's points. Thank you, Mark. Just on page 34, the conclusions of the WAS and Priory Forest Plan 6.2, that a commitment that these woodlands, quotes, will deliver increasing ecological benefit across the forest. How will we know that it does? I mean, can we? Who says? I'd love to, because it's such an important thing in this national park, enhancing ecology in general, and Forestry England should be leading on it too. And it would just be good to know that they have done that. Or will you review this in 3 years' time and they'll demonstrate how they've improved ecology?
Yeah, how you demonstrate that is difficult anyway. But it's sort of it's more like making sure that there's no losses, and that there will be benefits from a greater structural diversity of the woodlands, particularly for the ancient woodlands, the removal of non-natives. But it would be quite a task to.
Other places have to do surveys of what's existing today, and then surveys of how they're getting on. It can't be. I'm sure Natural England's doing that the whole time. It's just worth asking them. It would be really encouraging if they could demonstrate, it is a public body, how they've improved ecology. That's just one point. And Chair, may I have one more point?
Go ahead.
I'm a big fan of the restoration of ancient woodland, and I'm just interested in Forestry England's use of the word gradual replacement. And is that 5 years, 10 years, 1,000 years? What's gradual replacement of ancient woodland mean?
I think they tend to work on about 100 years. So 100 years is often mentioned, and when we were looking at some of these ancient woodlands, we were wondering, should the speed of change be accelerated? But the key element is not to lose anything. And so by doing it too quickly, you sometimes can lose things. Because some of the sites we were looking at would have been very poor before, and now we can see the improvements from the thinnings and the small scale fellings. And it's not a race to do it. I think in terms of control of invasives and damaging elements, then yes, that is. But if starting from a low point of view, as long as what's surviving there is not being lost and isn't being expanded, the speed isn't essential.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, members. So, Jane.
Climate change and everything that's happening, with the fact that quite a few of the trees have got diseases that we all know about in our forests and things like that are really causing some quite significant changes. How do we make sure that we're future-proofing what's going in? Are we looking at trees that used to be in, say, Italy that will now work here? Because at the end of the day, I know it sounds ridiculous, our climate is that sort of climate. So how are we making sure that what we're planting today, that in 40 years' time, is going to be the right things for this area?
Right. Yeah. Well, I think the term resilience is what's usually used to describe measures to deal with that. So it's certainly moving away from single species. So virtually all of these areas will not just have one species. So there will be natural regeneration of what was there previously, and then they will plant a range of trees, including some new ones from different parts of Europe. So I know that in fact in Wastmore there is a trial plot of all these what we call novel conifer species been put in to see how they're growing. So in particular, I know that they're planting Macedonian pine as a replacement for Scots pine, because Scots pine is potentially under some threat from a particular type of fungal disease. We know we're losing larch because of the threat from Phytophthora. And in terms of provenance, people are now planting transplants that have come from seed from more southerly provinces. But it's quite important to have a range, because obviously something has to grow now as well as in 80 years' time. So that is going, and that is why the wood, they've gone away from the old days of saying, we'll have X hectares of Sitka spruce and so much of Scots pine. It is all a range of species to try and mitigate that risk. And also they do, I don't know if you've seen it in the plan, but they do what they call ecological site classification, which has the climate change scenarios built into it. And so that when they're choosing the species that they want, they will use that system, as we do when we're doing woodland creation, to see what that might be sort of suitable now, what will be suitable under that changing climate. But it is difficult because we've only got a certain range of species to deal with.
Thank you, Mark. We've had a good look through the first design plans. 2 recommendations before you. Are you happy to take those? Nobody against? I'll take that as unanimous. Just before you go, another quick question about process. Tom raised the briefing. I think Mark and Tom know more than this, but we've had a pretty detailed look at some pretty detailed, intricate forest design plans. As statutory consultees, our input into changing these things continues to reduce. At the same time, it's really good for members to get a look at the detail of this stuff. So my question for you, is that something you want to keep doing at NPA? Is that something that maybe the climate change and conservation forum should be getting into the detail of? Is it something for planning committee? Tell me how it was for you. And also, what our expectations of changing anything are, because to be honest, we've done it. It's great to make us aware of that stuff, but we're not asking for any change, and we're unlikely, we're only responding as consultees anyway. So I'm in your hands, really, as to whether you want to keep doing it this way or to look at something different.
Clarify what the consultation procedure.
Yeah, just so we understand.
Obviously, as I think I said at the beginning, back in 2006, it was considered that there was, Forestry England is the largest single landowner or land manager in the national park. And since sort of, probably the 1990s, there've been significant changes to their forest holding, and so members and officers felt that it was important that we were involved in those in the discussions. And so in that 2006 meeting, members did say that we should report all forest design plans to members, and we've just been doing that ever since. We are consultees on the forest plans by agreement But in the past, that was still considered a statutory consultation, which meant that the Forestry Commission could not disregard members' comments without recourse to the Secretary of State. That has now changed. The mechanism by which that worked has been removed, and from moving forward, Forest Services, which is the regulatory arm of the Forestry Commission, will make their own decisions, and we will just be consulted for information purposes. Now, quite how Forestry England will want to carry on with consultations, we don't know yet. But we are not. There is less weight to our comments than there were in the past.
Yeah, no, I was just going to ask, I was slightly confused there, Jim, sorry. So effectively, you've asked for us to, you've nodded us through on these, and I would have raised an objection, particularly on the second one. I think it's slightly disproportionate that we spent a huge amount of time and had a formal vote on tree preservation orders that included a single tree, but we were very quickly nodded through on entire forest plans that involve hundreds of hectares of woodland. So I don't, just a point of order on that. And again, my concern would be, and the Coatmore one, we haven't even seen the final plan. It hasn't addressed lots of points. And I think whilst we may not have a formal role to, as a statutory consultee, as Mark has just outlined, I think we should take any powers that we have to try to influence Forestry England, to, give more weight, obviously, to the nature and the value that comes out of their woodland management approaches, which by and large are probably good. And in some ways it's an opportunity for them to say that they're doing something good rather than just avoiding commenting on it. But anyway, thank you, Chair.
So if we may have had some misunderstanding. My understanding is that Matt took down the points that you make, and that those will be put back to Forestry England as part of our response. I think that you had them as questions as opposed to objections, but certainly we would have sought some further information as to how they were going to deal with, was it resilience and peat and soils, and that would be in our response. So if that's okay, that was my understanding. Okay. John?
Just wanted to re-emphasise the importance of the what Christine has just said, particularly in relation. It just seems strange, doesn't it, that particularly in relation to wildlife, that you're making these huge changes and plans to develop our forests and woodlands in a national park, and not to say anything about how a species is going to be affected by these developments, and then to be told, well, because the downside of this is we've been told, well, we know your objections we know the points that you raise, but we're going to press ahead anyway. It'd be nice to have some sort of reassurance that the contribution that we make is important, if not significant.
I think later in the year that may change.
Yeah, thanks. I hadn't appreciated that this statutory thing was changing, Mark, but also it's going to change in the future fairly soon, isn't it? Where the duty on them to take account of our management plan is going to be increased. So that's something we need to consider, or they need to consider. The second point is I think it's important that these these reports come to members in some shape or form. And you mentioned the forum, and it seems to me that's a sensible place for the forum to consider that, so that we have a small group of members that are aware of all of this information. I recall there have been the odd occasion when we have had some significant objections to these, and officers felt that it was beneficial to bring those to a full committee so that we can take a decision, and those objections then carry that bit more weight, we would like to think. So it seems that there's a way forward in this. Involve the forum a bit more and involve the committee a bit less. But the committee do consider the really serious objections where there are them. And clearly, if the forum thinks that there are serious objections, then it would automatically come to us. So there's a way I think we can balance things up.
It's absolutely, it's up to you members. I mean, it's like you taking the best use of our time and our expertise and not losing the impact of what we're doing. So, you know, if all members are, like you say, the forest design plans do affect a big chunk of the national park, what we can do about them is reducing considerably. So there's a balance there, isn't there? But and if members are happy to have these come to MPA, that's fine. If you'd like them to go to the forum, so you can get a bit more in-depth discussion with officers and some of the finer points that may not be for everybody, that's fine too. I mean, if no one proposes a change, we'll leave it as it is. Colin?
Fair, don't let it be said, sorry, that I'm not in favour of forests and woodland. Even though individual trees maybe aren't in the middle of a village, maybe aren't the thing. But I think it'd be as well if these forestry plans do come to us. I mean, what's it taking? Half an hour to go through two forestry plans? It's not that out of this world, is it? You know, so that all members know what is actually going on. And I can't see any great objection to that coming to NPA to just to have a look at, so everybody knows what is actually going on. Thank you.
Okay. So, well, anyway, we've done the job at NPA, and we've made our recommendations plus those extra points to add. We'll leave it as it is, but I know that maybe officers, we will just have a look at how best to get the right level of expertise and member input into this process, and at the same time not lose the impetus of having the full authorities, you know, weight behind the decisions and things that we make. It might be that it's a short thing that authority needs to endorse, and maybe the forum can tease out the detail. If you leave it with us, and if any change that comes will come before members first. Chris?
Oh, thank you very much.
We're not giving it to planning, not this one.
I just mentioned something that Malcolm raised, which is that they should be seen, shouldn't they, as an important tool in delivering our management plan.
Yeah.
So there might be less of a them understanding what we want from these consultations, but as Malcolm said, the legislation is going to require them to do more to deliver.
We're going to come to that.
Incredibly important.
We're going to come to that.
Landscape.
Yeah, we're going to come to that later. Yeah. Okay. Where are we? Thank you, Mark. I think so. We're on Thornton Access Road Car Park.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Talking about a 250-metre strip of access road sounds slightly trivial compared to what we've just been talking about. However, members at FRASC will be aware of the issue here. Thorntondale Car Park is a significant one for us. Prior to us being a freestanding authority, North Yorkshire County Council acquired the Thorntondale car park in the early 1980s, and it's been operating since then as a car park. Ownership of it was transferred to us when we became a freestanding body in the late 1990s. There are a number of significant liabilities with that car park. As those of you who are familiar with the site will know, it sits within a lovely former walled garden, and at some point over the next 5 to 10 years, we will need to do a significant amount of work getting that wall back into a good state of repair. And we also have, as mentioned earlier, 250 metres of access road, which effectively joins our car park to the main road. Now, as the property was transferred across to us, I'm not sure whether the intention was ever to lumber us with the dubious pleasure of effectively maintaining a road which accesses a small number of houses and is also the access point to the playing field at Thorntondale. And the latter has caused us some issues over the years and required us to spend some of our money repairing some damage there. Now, we know this access road needs some money spending on it over the next 3, 4, 5 years. But during the course of conversations with North Yorkshire Council Highways officers, the offer has come through from North Yorkshire Council to adopt the access road. That would remove a liability from this authority in the long term, because it needs work around about every 15 years. And so what I'm asking for here is your approval to via 30,000 from our property reserve for us to effectively pay North Yorkshire Council to bring that road up to standard. Now, that sum of money we would have to spend anyway in the next few years to make good that short piece of road. So I think the proposal here is a positive one for us in the long term, in that it removes a liability from us. It in no way affects our ability to access and use our property at Thorntondale, and it will continue to generate good sums of money for us. Stop there, Chair.
I'll just go to Colin first from Press.
Order in the sense.
Oh, go on, George.
Because this involved a financial transaction between the North York Moors National Park Authority and North Yorkshire Council, I was just wondering about the legal position for North Yorkshire councillors who are attending this meeting.
We've lost Richard there. I would have thought it isn't a prejudicial interest, unless you're actually making the decisions for North Yorkshire Council.
We'll just double check. But I'm of the same view, but I just want to get a second opinion from Richard, our monitoring officer.
Good question, George. I'm always handy to ask them in advance. Yeah. Shall we just put this one on hold? Yeah. You want to actually get this? Okay. Shall we? We'll put this on hold and we'll move on to the Chief Executive's update, if that's okay, and then we'll come back to this same time. So, Chief Executive's Officer's update is on page 44. There's a few things in there that I think I've talked a lot, so I'll get Tom.
Yeah, there are. Hopefully, everyone can still hear me, because I'm without a mic, so I'm projecting into the other one. So I'm usually tempted to take these reports as read, but I'm not going to do this time, because there've been some quite important and significant updates in the course of the last week since we distributed the board pack to members. So the first of those just relates to item 3.1 in the update, in relation to the announcement around permitted development rights to consultation that closes today. So members may be aware that we, from discussions we've had previously about this, that the entire family of national park authorities and national park organisations has expressed quite profound concern about the significant and deleterious impacts that those changes would have. We responded as a National Park Authority about 10 days ago to that consultation. National Parks England responded on behalf of the collective late last week. We've also encouraged responses from parish councils across the national park area as well, and from wider organisations on account, as I say, of the significant and damaging impact that those consultation proposals would have. Second is in relation to the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill. And so there are two parts to this. The first is that you'll be aware that following a vote in the House of Lords, the proposals to change the consideration of nutrient flows for wastewater treatment works did not pass. And therefore the regulation in terms of how we as a local planning authority and a national park authority consider those issues in the context of nutrient neutrality remains, and therefore we'll continue to proceed on that basis. More significantly, as I mentioned under point 3.3, was the amendment or series of amendments that were tabled by the government at third reading in the House of Lords last week that relate to the duties on other public bodies with regard to both national park purposes and in relation to management plans that has quite significant and positive benefits for the way in which other public bodies should have regard to our purposes and the way in which they work in relation to statutory management plans. And members who've been around a while will be aware that it's been I guess a significant bone of contention with national park authorities that whilst we have vested in us those statutory purposes and duties, that the level of weight that's applied in other public bodies is relatively limited to a duty to have regard to national park purposes, which is fairly open-ended and places no great power, and was as Julian Glover's report back in 2019 recognised is pretty weak in terms of the level of, I guess, compulsion or pressure it applies on the public bodies, including local authorities, to take forward those statutory purposes. We can't do everything as National Park Authority. We've got limited powers, limited resources, so the ability to deliver national park purposes, but more importantly our management plan objectives, depends on the full weight of public policy coming together. So after quite a considerable amount of toing and froing between ourselves as National Parks England, with DEFRA and with ministers, and also following some pressure from peers in the House of Lords, I'm pleased to report that the last week government did table a series of amendments that quite significantly changed the balance in relation to the way in which other public bodies and statutory undertakers like water companies and utilities and so on should how they take forward those purposes. And it's worth just reading out the way in which the legislation following the agreement on that amendment will presumably go forward to royal assent, which should happen in November. And that is that in exercising or performing any functions in relation to or so as to affect land in any national park in England, a relevant authority other than a devolved Welsh authority must seek to further the purposes as specified in section 5.1, which is the statutory purposes that are laid out in the National Parks and Countryside Act. That change of those words from have regard to further is significant in the sense that it puts much greater weight on other public bodies to take forward statutory purposes. There's also wording within the amendment that gives the enabling powers to government to come forward with legislation through a statutory instrument that would also require public bodies and again other organisations, relevant authorities, to contribute to the preparation, implementation or review of national park management plans for parks in England, which again is a significant strengthening of the emphasis that all the public bodies should have on the delivery of management plan objectives. So these are really quite important and quite significant positive developments that we've welcomed as a family of national parks. Clearly, just changing something in law doesn't make it happen. And I think we look forward to the department, as in DEFRA, coming forward with further guidance on that. But it's really, really significant in terms of changing that emphasis of public policy in the way that we deliver for national parks, and has some bearing on the items that we've talked about earlier in the agenda today, which I think is worth bearing in mind. So perhaps I'll just stop there and pause, Chair. There are a couple of other points in the Chief Exec's report, but I did just want to bring that one to members' attention, because that's quite a significant and important change literally within the last week.
Yeah, absolutely. And something we've chased around the houses in different ways for years, actually. So I'm really pleased that government have taken this on. The Secretary of State, I've had a couple of rather strange video calls with the Secretary of State, with AONBs and all sorts of part of the process. But ultimately, government did take on the view that they would accept this. I don't think we could have never have pushed it through. So I think that's a real achievement. And also, actually, offline, you know, the times that Lord Benyon's been to visit us, he's always been a good supporter, and he's been in charge of taking this through the Lords, hasn't he? And that I'm sure that he's actually been a helpful influence on getting that done. So the paint hasn't dried, but I think it's really good news. And as Tom says, you know, it might mean that the Highways Authority couldn't put that silly lamppost next to the tree, or it might mean that the forest design people have to come back to us to prove how their forest design plans are following the objectives of our management plan, and we could interrogate them on that if they're not. So I think quite a significant change, and it will give us the opportunity as a national park to go after those people and say, show us how you're furthering our plans, instead of just having to say, tell us you've thought about it. Significant move. Also, in particular, thank you to Tom. I'd like to record our thanks to Tom, because as the current lead chair of National Parks England, Tom's been working 3 times as hard on this as he has doing his day job. And so, really significant achievement, Tom, us and the other national parks are in your debt. I'd just like to put that on the record. Any quick questions? We'll move on. I'm just going to finish Tom's report, Ian, and then we'll go back to that, if that's okay. Anything else on your report, Tom?
I think the only other thing that I thought it was just worth bearing in mind, but just bringing forward was just the reference in the report as well to the fact that we've started discussions with North Yorkshire Council in relation to our rights of way delegation agreement as well. We currently operate under a level of delegation from our 2 highways authorities for the delivery of the statutory rights of way network and the maintenance of that, which we fund entirely from the core grant. And as members will be familiar, the core grant is coming under increasing pressure because of the fact that we're operating under a flat cash arrangement with DEFRA, or at least have been for the last 4 years. That scenario, I don't envisage continuing much as well. We'll certainly hope for that under the next spending review round, and therefore the delivery of the kind of statutory obligations that we do on behalf of those 2 highways authorities becoming a greater burden for the National Park Authority. And whilst we've got no proposals at this stage, we certainly think it's appropriate that we seek some form of contribution to helping us achieve those statutory obligations on behalf of the highways, the main highways authority within the area.
So again, to avoid us getting wrong on the same pipe with our North Yorkshire members, I think that can be reported as a point of information that process is going forward. Historically, North Yorkshire have given us some funding to help improve the quality of our public access offer in the national park, which seems right. And obviously, with resources challenged, we have to decide where best we can put them to get advantage, and we'll see how you get on, Tom. I think if we do it like that, we don't get wrong with. Any other questions for Tom on his chief executive's update? Knows that if you have some questions about the national scene and stuff, it's an opportunity to ask them. We had the National Parks UK get together in the Lake District at the end of last week, and because of devolution, you know, that Scotland and Wales and England have different sort of political, different financial and different legal frameworks these days, but it's still really useful to get together. The one that the main subject of that was dealing with climate change and whether or not national parks join an initiative from, I think, the UN called the Race to Zero, came at COP26. We haven't come to a view on that, but that will be, if we were to do that, I think members would need to make that decision probably.
Yeah.
And so that's what it was about. Some interesting stuff for us, and that'll come to us in due course. Okay. So I'll bring that chief executive's update to the end, and so we'll just nip back to item 15. George had a question about interests, Richard. So could you please give some guidance?
No, George, good question. It's good that it's asked. The starting point definitely is North Yorkshire Council members can take part as in this dual-hatted sort of arrangement. So you've got your role at North Yorkshire Council, you've got your role here. So that's your starting point. That is legitimate. But then you have to take 2 further steps. You've got to decide if there's any particular significance in your position at North Yorkshire Council that might be considered to be a prejudicial interest. So if you're sitting on a highways committee and your remit is specifically dealing with these matters, it may be that then it becomes a prejudicial interest. Secondly, generally, if you've said or done anything that anybody would construe as meaning you have a closed mind in relation to this. So your starting point is, yes, you can take part, but then you just have to be satisfied that you don't have any particular position at North Yorkshire Council which a reasonable person would consider a prejudicial interest. And secondly, that you haven't said or done anything that would show that you had a closed mind on this. I would expect the answer to both of those is no, but I need you to both all be satisfied. And for completeness, it probably makes sense for the minutes to record all of you declare a non-prejudicial position as North Yorkshire councillors, assuming you're all satisfied that you're not prejudiced.
Okay. Happy with that? Good. So just remember, but by and large, sorry, yeah, okay, done. I'll just go to Colin because this did come to first, because we didn't have a report. It seemed right that if members were asked to make a decision, they needed a report. We now have a report. Do you want to comment, Colin?
Well, I didn't really, but anyway. Yeah, Colin. This came to us about 5 minutes before the FRASC meeting started, and to be fair, I thought it was a good idea because not that we knew there was the car park was sat down a drive of 250 metre, but we were asked that we put forward what 30k to get rid of that liability, which, to be fair, I thought it was money well spent. But at FRASC, some of the members thought, well, we needed more input onto what was actually to be taken over or what wasn't to be taken over. So, you know, Ian's put it down in writing as to what we actually had and what's been taken over. And to be fair, I still think it's pretty reasonable to ask North Yorkshire Council to take it over. And if members hadn't wanted the extra amount of detail on it, then I'm sure it might have gone through on the FRASC day. But all the details are here now, and I expect members to go forward with it.
Thanks, Colin. So I think, you know, on the question of value for money, it sets out that is it 2.3 of the report that clearly this could cost us a considerable amount of money in the future, and I think that's a good way of justifying spending 30,000 on it now. So, further recommendations
Not
before.
about the value for money, just interestingly, which I haven't taken on board, is the fact that it's actually, I'll say it's unadopted road, I think. Just clear that up for me, can you? That'd be great, thank you.
Both from a value for money point of view and a local relationships point of view, us having no responsibility for what's essentially a road strikes me as a really advantageous thing for us.
That's great, that's what I wanted to know. I thought it can't be as simple as that, about other users and potholes and. So if you'd like to be a councillor, thank you. Thank you.
Go on, Michelle.
I think just following on from Heather's point, having dealt with individuals who live on unadopted roads, private roads, and I know what reflecting, I think given what's on the paper here, I think it is common sense, because the long-term liability you will spend over whatever decades, a hell of a lot more than what you're going to pay out in the short term. And I think it's just better, yeah.
Sure. So I think, and the point is whether or not those people that have access have a duty to contribute to the repairs, and that'll probably be in their deeds as to whether or not, you know, that they are liable for the upkeep or for damage that they may cause. There's a thing going back into, takes me into another world, a thing called a private street works order, isn't there, whereby the frontage owners of a street can be charged to repair it to the centre of the road. And I think probably, unless you come back and say that there really is recourse to say to these people they should also contribute, we probably just need to take it on the chin. But it's a fair point that they're getting their road done up for nothing.
And this is not meant to be provocative, and I hope that people might be able to help me understand that if we're looking at value for money, and the fact that it's going to, potentially we're going to consider this to be adopted, and that's great, because that doesn't happen very often, does it? There's a long queue for that, so that's fantastic. And £30,000 doesn't seem a great deal compared to the income we're getting, so you can do the maths, but how do we demonstrate value for money by only going to one highways maintenance provider? Is it because, who happens to be the council of North Yorkshire? Is that because they're going to be ultimately the landowner, so we can bypass those procurement rules, because that's the answer, isn't it?
It is, yes.
We don't have to go anywhere else. Thank you. I just wanted to be clear that was it. So that wasn't provocative, was it? It was just asking the question. Thank you.
I think useful discussion to. I mean, 30,000 is, you know, a significant sum to bus operators and many people. So we need to make sure that we've given it due consideration. The recommendations before you, members. Are you happy to accept that?
Yeah.
Is anybody against it? No, thank you. That's approved. Thank you, Ian. So, mindful of the time, we've still got a bit of stuff to get through. Next we have item 17 is the report from our first chair. It's set out on the agenda. Do you want to speak to that, Colin?
Well, just take it as read, Chair, if that's all right. Any questions, then fair enough, I'll try my best to answer them.
No, thanks for providing it. Any questions for Colin? No, I take it we've dealt with the rail matter. Item 18 is the feedback from lead members on our forums. I think there's Patrick. Did we have a forum meeting? We don't have a lead member from the other one yet, so.
We did very quickly, Chair, just on the papers there, I think I'm right in saying this actually was the inaugural meeting of the newly named forum. So it's the Recreation and Wellbeing Forum and the Conservation and Climate Change Forum.
It was a joint forum too.
It was a joint one. There's no longer ARB and CLM for any new members here today. Then the names of the forums have changed. So this was the inaugural CCC, Climate Change and Conservation Forum. We discussed blue corridors. In simple terms, we discussed water, which is rivers and water, such an important part of the management plan. And I think over the next year or so that this forum will look at the key elements of the management plan. We had a really, really good presentation from officers. The Blue Corridors project, which has spent just shy of £1 million, I think, over the last few years, has been a big success. And we heard all about it. And we went on a visit to look at a typical project on our way up to Bransdale. And if any of you attended the parish forums over the last year, you will have seen that presentation as well. It was on the similar grounds. But I think the National Park should be very proud of the work it's done. I hope it leads to further funding. I hope it inspires Yorkshire Water and the Environment Agency to carry on supporting all this work, because we're only just starting on it, really. I think that was the main conclusions out of it. Very good start, lots to do in a nutshell. And just a plug, week today is the next Conservation and Climate Change Forum, and we'll be discussing all things peat and carbon. Anyone's welcome to come.
Thank you. Any questions for Patrick? No, good stuff. Thanks for that, Patrick. Good work. So,
the meeting is here.
Yeah, moving on then, reports from members of outside bodies. I think those are there in the agenda for you. The iPad has gone down again. Those are there for information. I don't know if anyone wanted to do anything verbal, if they haven't put a report in. Now's your chance.
Well, I'll just give you a quick rundown then. That one.
For which body is it coming?
This is the trust, the North York Moors Trust,
Okay.
which met last Thursday, the 14th. I'll give you a basic director's report, which James Metcalf gave us. The trust now updated from the North York Moors National Park Trust to the North York Moors Trust. We now have 1 day a week admin support provided by the authority, which Vicky Taylor comes in. I believe that's up until the end of March. James has been out and about introducing himself, network, sharing his plans and expressing his wishes and sharing for collaboration. He also met a good amount of other trusts and foundations with a view to sharing information. We were in receipt of funding request from Rydale Folk Museum for an old milking parlour, which was going to be scrapped, and unless we stepped in, the trust was asked for a £2,000 towards relocation. Other money has been secured from elsewhere. So we agreed to provide this money. Obviously, we needed this was part of the cost, and the interpretation would provide a strong learning with some representation from the trust. The trust refresh and website. due to high estimates for branding around, James designed the website himself, which was shown to trust members. And this was looking towards more independence from the authority, which we are working towards sort of in the future. His website was looking very good, to be fair. And then moving forward, the trust logo, which we're trying to get a firm to design a new logo. Fitzpatrick Design was chosen to produce some logos, but none of these were acceptable. So to be fair, I don't know whether the other trust members have seen it, but James designed a logo himself, which I thought would do the job just fine. Hopefully the logo and website will be launched in the very near future. Heather McNiff, Head of Outdoor Learning for the NPA, gave a presentation on health, wellbeing strategy, projects, green social prescribing and geo-coaching, as well as working with all young people. Trustee Volunteer Day on this Wednesday, creating new ponds at Stockinghouse Farm, and the next meeting on 14th of December. So that's basically us. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. Did you want to say something about CMP, Christine?
Thanks, Chair. I'll just say that the CMP hasn't formally met since I've been appointed to that role, and I have had a one-to-one scheduled with the chief exec, which had been rescheduled, and the rescheduled meeting has now been rescheduled as well. Not a lot to report on that front.
Because CMP have been actually quite helpful to us in the chase around the increase to our duty of others. The LERB bill, that's the word I was looking for. So yeah, CMP, well, to be honest, I mean, sometimes can go both ways, but we wouldn't have got the traction that we did if they hadn't had the shoulders to tap that they can do sometimes. So credit to them. Yeah, good that we can work together. We look forward to your report when you've had a meeting. Anything to? I've got you down, Clive. Did you want to say anything on?
Thank you, Chair. Only to say that unfortunately, because of my laptop not working, I couldn't get onto the meeting on the 18th. It just wouldn't let me on. But for those who don't know much about this housing thing, it really is there to help promote affordable housing and also community-led housing. Well, unfortunately, in community-led housing, there is nothing in the national park except for one, which is a Lee loan. And that's not off the ground yet completely. It's due to come into planning shortly, hopefully. But we do have there's still great problems with providers. They do put so many restrictions into place. Silly things like I did go to a meeting last week. It was to do with the access road in. The providers suddenly come and said, it's too steep. Right, okay, we're going to have to ask Highways to come and look at it. I managed to get Highways there last week. No problem whatsoever, as long as it's no different than the other roads in the area, which are quite steep. But that's where our land is in this area. The Leland one's been on the go since 2018, and we're still pushing to get it through. We were allocated £1.83 million by the government for this project and two others, which was the almshouses at Hinderwell and also a project at Danby, which has never got off the ground, the Danby one. So at the moment, I'm hoping that there'll be around about £800,000 for the Leland one when it comes into on. But we are still getting problems again from the providers who are saying there isn't enough money. Yet we've got in that project £750,000 more than anyone else would get for their projects. We just don't understand. But this is what they're coming up with. There's so many obstacles. I can see why the community-led ones are not being brought forward. It is just too difficult, which is a great shame, because it is a good source of bringing. It could be a good source of bringing other houses into the area. It's done in the rural and the urban areas quite well, and it's quite successful, but certainly not within the national park areas, which is a great shame. We get a massive support from the planning department, but still it's an ongoing struggle. And I do take this up with these people, but see what happens. So I'm sorry, but I'll have to wait for the next meeting to give you an update on the actual housing trust. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Clive. I think that's it for outside bodies. So thank you for those updates. Take us on to 20, which is on the record. And I think most of that's there for your information. I just catch up on there's a minute there of the meeting that we had for our members training and development group. And Judith's kindly done a minute, which is put on there at Appendix 2. I think in a nutshell, the sort of the outcomes of that group were that actually, as I've hinted on our virtual update, that members like the virtual updates monthly. It's quite a resource efficient way of officers and members catching up without having to do a lot of preparation paperwork. As we go to live stream meetings, it gives you an opportunity to ask the stupid questions as well, which is always useful. And so members really wanted to keep that. At the same time, those and some of the on-site training days, we sometimes struggle to get sufficient uptake with people with busy lives and lots of other commitments. And so we thought actually the online stuff was quite easy. We want to keep those pictures. I don't think officers should feel that they have to fill the agenda. If there's nothing on the monthly agenda, we can all go home early. But I think keeping those fixtures was important, and members felt they wanted to sort of own that as their interface with officers and the ability to catch up with what's going on. So the other thing we thought was really important is that the face-to-face training days that we do have, it's important that we do updates on our decision making, on our induction process, and to make sure that members are up to speed on what's required and expected for decision making, with public money in the public eye. And so there was some sort of must-have updates and refreshers as well. And so we thought we'd try and make sure that we had those subjects worked into face-to-face training days. Probably actually just as training days, because sometimes it's quite difficult to bolt that stuff onto another meeting and things like that. So, but I think the emphasis is that those days that we do have face-to-face are sort of really must attend or expected to attend events. And so we try and make them fewer, cover the really important stuff. But it's important for us as an authority to be able to demonstrate to our auditors and Keith as well that that we're doing that stuff and up to date. So I think that the timetable of meetings has been adjusted a bit, Judith, to reflect that. Any questions? Happy to try and answer them. I think myself and Malcolm and Clive and Christine had to think about it. So that's what that is. Okay, I'll take silence as acceptance. I think that brings us to the end of our public business. So we just need to move into